Hello, this is Chef Juan from foodwishes.com with Michelada. That's right, I normally don't drink beer while producing these videos, but this time I really had no choice because a Michelada is a spicy, amazingly refreshing, beer-based cocktail and pretty much the ultimate hot weather adult beverage. And while I will admit drinking beer made this production a little harder, it also made everyone slightly more attractive. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started and let me show you how I make my Micheladas. So normally these are made with a little splash of tomato juice, but what I like to do is make a fresh vegetable juice using some of these toy box tomatoes, which I think is really going to give us a much fresher, much more vine-ripened tomato flavor. And during the summer, these are not hard to find, but really any variety of cherry tomato should work. And then to add to the vegetable goodness, we will also add a little bit of celery. Traditionally, people use a pinch of celery salt in this, but since we're making our own juice, I figured let's use some fresh. And then last but not least, we'll do a little sweet red bell pepper. And of course, if you want an extra spicy version, you can certainly use some fresh hot peppers here, maybe a Fresno chili, or even a habanero if you are muy machismo. By the way, like bowling, my Spanish gets much better after a few beers. And then all we need to do to prep this is transfer it into a blender and process this until we have something very smooth. So we'll pulse it a few times to get it started, and then let it run on high for a few seconds until we have something that looks like this. And at that point, what we'll do is we'll transfer that into a strainer, because personally, I think we should remove those seeds and skins. Plus, it's only going to take an extra minute, so I'm going to go ahead and use a spatula to push that through. And what we should be left with is something that's very sweet, very fresh tasting, sort of the liquid essence of a summer garden. And then once our juice is prepped, what I like to do is wrap it up and keep it in the fridge so it's nice and ice cold when we go to make our Micheladas. And by the way, if it sits there a long time, it can separate. So if you do prep this ahead, make sure you give it a good whisking before you use it. But anyway, like I said, we're going to wrap that up and leave it in the fridge until we need it. And that leaves us with just one optional job to do before we put these Micheladas together, and that would be the rimming of the glass. So what I suggest we do is sprinkle some flaky salt on a plate, on top of which we will add some freshly ground black pepper, as well as any type of red ground chili pepper. You could use paprika, smoked paprika, chipotle. Heck, even cayenne would work here, which is obviously what I used. And then once our spicy salt mixture is prepped, all we have to do is take a cut piece of lime and use that to moisten the rim of our glass, and then we'll invert it and sort of tap it into our mixture, which is going to coat the rim as seen. So pretty much exactly the same technique we'd use for margaritas. And then once our glass is prepped, we can fill it up with ice. And don't be shy with the ice, fill it right up. In my opinion, the colder these things are, the better they taste. And before we add our two main ingredients, which is our fresh tomato juice and beer, we want to add a few very important additional ingredients. The first of which would be a few dashes of Worcestershire sauce. I'm getting better at that word. And then we're also going to do a couple drops of soy sauce for a little extra hit of savoriness, and also so I can use the word umami in the blog post. And then we're definitely going to need some hot sauce. I'm using a very popular Mexican variety, but any pepper sauce will work. And at this point, I'm going to pour in a splash of our homemade tomato vegetable juice. And I'm not really putting that much, because I do like my Micheladas being mostly beer. So I'm only putting in about 1/4 of a cup. And then after our tomato mixture goes in, maybe the third most important ingredient, we need some fresh lime juice. So I'm going to squeeze in the juice of half a lime. And then last but not certainly least, we're going to top this off with some ice-cold Mexican lager. And usually I would say to use any style of beer you want, but I really do think an inexpensive lager works best here. But that's up to you and your cabeza to decide which cerveza. And the method I like to use is to fill it up about 3/4 of the way first, and then take a spoon or one of these fancy bartender stirrers, and we'll give that a little stir to mix all our components together. And by the way, when bartenders do this, it's just not to mix stuff up. When you move those ice cubes around like this, it actually makes the drink colder. So we'll give that a good mix, at which point we will finish topping it off with our ice-cold cerveza, and then we'll garnish very simply with a thin slice of lime that I definitely cut before I started drinking. And our Michelada, at least the Chef John version, is done. And it might just be the beer talking, but to me that looks exactly like one of those pink-orange summer sunsets. But don't get me wrong, nobody's drinking these things because of how they look. They're drinking these because they're incredibly tasty and unbelievably refreshing. And it seems like we have a lot going on in here, but it's actually a very, very light drink and not heavy at all. Oh, and speaking of heavy, did I ever mention a long time ago, I used to be able to bench press 200 pounds. Almost 200 pounds. Oh yeah. But anyway, that's it. Chef John's official version of Michelada. And I realize if you've never had one of these before, you could be skeptical. I mean, when I first heard about this, I was like, beer, tomato juice, hot sauce, and lime? That sounds horrible. But when you try one of these, especially if it's like 95 in the shade, you will understand. So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy responsibly.